Okay. Good morning. This is Pops on February 1st. I was just going through my usual YouTube list, and I was watching one on Area Diesel, and he talked about Farmcraft 101 working on a John Deere 350. And, excuse me, well, that's gone. I guess we won't worry about that yet. That's way under there. And he was working on the injection pump. I started laughing because in years past, the dealers I worked for, if you tore an injection pump apart, even for as simple as resealing the cross shafts, the first thing I got was, specifically in the former Sharon Springs garage, which I'll mention because they're not in business anymore, was before anything even happened was extreme anger. No, we're responsible for the whole pump. And that's all they cared about. So even though it might be you pull the cap off, take the linkage out, and put in a couple O-rings and stick it back in and tell the customer this will slow it down, but it's not going to stop it, the customer's generally okay with that, especially if you mark it on the work order, which isn't that hard. Back then it used to require a pen, not even a computer. It wasn't that hard. But they just got paranoid about it. So what do we take apart? Nothing. I just got to the point after a while I got tired of being yelled at for doing things that scared other people that didn't know what they were doing. I just let it go. Now, Mr. Farmcraft 101, it appears he's scared of nothing. Well, it's his machine. He can do that, and that's great. That's the only problem I have with doing a lot of repairs. It's just plain I don't have the income since I retired early. It's not coming in. And my IRA rollover from a former 401k, vaporized. Oh, it was vaporizing ever since 2021. January. But anyway, yeah, literally. Before that, it was just in a money market and I was earning a little bit of money. Another investment one I had was earning fair, enough to say, I'll leave it there. And the third one that was an actual 401k from another company that we didn't have to roll over for some reason. I was an employee for a short time there until they put a jackass in management. It's one of those things where you just look at them and say, no, I can't do this anymore. This is just stupid. You know what I mean? And then I was talking with a salesman here, and then we're talking years out, and he says he's still there, and oh no, he can't do anything wrong, and he is horrible. But, hey, what can I say? Well, Mr. Farmcraft 101. This isn't an arrogant tutoring thing. This is informative for you to help you next time. Because most everything you're doing on that cat dozer rework that you're doing on the tracks and such is normal. The only problem you had was getting the master link out of the track. However, you did something a lot of people don't do, and that is you located the master pretty darn quick, and that was good. But getting it out... That was a struggle of major proportions, and for several reasons. Your idea of a C-clamp was okay in the end result. Now, for those of you that aren't up to speed, go to the Caterpillar on Farmcraft 101 that he did, what was it, 8 months ago, I think? And what I have done in the past is literally took a plate and bolted the plate to the track links before I even started, if I had to do the driving thing at all. And there were some rare cases that I had to. In fact, even for assembling, where you're putting two links on the track and you're pressing the pin through it, there were times that I built a plate to go over them so that when I press the pin in on a new track, the repair link or whatever, even a regular link, that when I put the two halves together, because if you're replacing a link, we torched it out, period. There was no pressing of the pin or anything else. We torch it off the bushing in the back, we torch it, just cut it right off. So you had the right idea in general overall, but driving the master pin out, yeah, that was a fail of, I can say, ignorance without being mean. If you're not familiar with it, that is 99% every time I went to a track job, even on something as large as I worked on Komatsu. So if I went to a D155, which is equivalent to a D8, we used to call it a D8 killer, literally. It outpushed even the early models would outpush some of the D8s, a lot of the newer ones. The old ones, that was a hard press. The old D8s were animals. We respected them. But Cat's only true competition has been Komatsu for probably 50, 60 years in this country. Well, anyway, to go back to the track, the D155, big dang pin. We'd press them on and off, and people would expect us to show up with a big rod and a 40-pound hammer. I'm serious. That's how we do it all the time, you know. It's in a lot of the municipal shops that had their little dozers, that's what they would do. They literally would weld a piece of pipe, and the guys that got smart welded a cable onto the pin, maybe 2 or 3 cables to hold it and keep it in line, and the guy would sit there with the cable so that the shock load didn't go up the shaft into their hand. Because when they hit that pin, the shock load coming in, you can't get enough insulation on there unless you get one of those foam covers. It's painful. Very, very, very painful. So there was an idea that what was Ralph's name? Dang it. Ralph, if you're watching someday, it's you. I think Ralph was out of Connecticut. His family had a John Deere dealership. And because of the family size, apparently, he couldn't get into it. So he went out on his own and started selling Alice Charmers. But Ralph came up with an idea because in that Deere dealer, when you go out on the road, they didn't have appropriate track press all the time. And they wanted to get moving, and the dozers were pretty small. So they came up with an idea. There's my lesson. Yes, it's going to be in reverse. You'll just have to accept it. One of the things that Ralph would do is, this is your bushing on the track. This is where your master pin would be. In some place in this front area, you probably could do it here, but not with the same success. He would take the torch and nick a section through so that it was actually open, like a C, just a little smallmouth C, and it would relieve enough of the pressure that if he did it on both sides, he could drive the pin out. Now, in that case, when you're doing that, you take the track pad off and then put the track pad back on and do your driving. So you run into what you did before, where the other side kept pushing out. Number 2, I wanted to show you. I'm trying to do this, but I can't find an assembled link I can use. There's your track bushing, okay? And bushing going through the hole here, that is a press fit. Anywhere between 5 and 10 thousandths press fit. Probably around 5. They don't press them horrendously hard there, but it is a press fit where your bushing fits in there. Another one, the next one. You see the bushing I have marked inside here, not the full width. On a Track Master link, the bushing is not full width. The end of the bushing here, that's why I'm drawing pictures, or printing pictures, comes flush to the outside of this. You say, what's the significance of that? Well, because every other bushing is proud of this surface up to a 1/4 inch, sometimes more, depending on the size of the dozer. Why? Well, because the other side of this link has a depression in it. On this end has a depression, so that one link literally latches over another. And then they're quite often, not on the newer ones, there's often is a dust seal in there on both sides. So they're latched together, and when you press the pin in, the pin holds it together. So you have 2 wear surfaces essentially, but most of the wear is almost entirely on the pin. And what the idea of cupping over it is, it's harder for dirt and crap to get in there. So you have 2 ways that pin and bushing are locked in together. But on the master pin, it doesn't have that. The one master link is flush. Why would you do that? What they do is, on the inside of this end, they have a huge seal, or sometimes just a bunch of washers. all stacked up to fill the space that gives the pin another surface area to ride on for strength, so that all the force isn't just out here, but the washers and everything else internally ride against that counterbore. And then the other link is smooth on the side, so when you finally drive that pin out, they can fold apart, and you don't have to worry about them latched over the end of the bushing where you have to pry them apart and get them up out of there, because they have to come together. Unless the track is absolutely shot, then you'll get them where you can move them around. So that's one idea to give you when you go to take it apart and nick that little front edge. If there is a seal in there, it's usually a urethane and stink and smoke, so be careful. Okay, number 2, 3, 4. We're still going. Okay, now I've got numbers on here. This is 3 to 5 thousandths. On the master pin that you were working with, it's a smaller diameter than the rest of the pins. Less press fit, just because it's the master. They want it to be able to come in and out easier. And you only have one pin to keep a track of. You don't have to watch every other pin around. Most of them are 3 to 5 thousandths press fit when you put them in. The normal pins on the rest of the track, and they can be almost identical. You look at the pins, unless you measure them, you don't know the difference without that dimple. So the rest of them are pressed hard to stay in place. Now, the newer excavators will have a link that looks all the same, but you'll see a slot. Let me go back. I couldn't get a picture of it. It wouldn't allow me to download it. But in here, you'll see a slot cut through where my finger is and through it horizontally like that. And the slot is for a T-head. On the end of the pin, you slide it in, they put a roll pin, usually a double roll pin on the other end to hold it in place. Sometimes a stainless steel cotter pin will work better. 9 times out of 10, that's in excavators and small ones, because the large excavators, they travel a heck of a lot more usually than the little ones do. And the little ones are going like rockets. And if something falls out, it just stops. A big one, when something falls out, stuff happens. So they're a little careful. But that gives you an idea of what you're looking at with your bushings, your links, your pins. You know, why you were having a hard time getting that out is another reason. That once they have some time and they set, there is some rust that, believe it or not, that still sits in there. And I don't know why, but they tend to grow together like a bolt in a hole for a long time. And the initial getting that broke loose is more critical than any other part of it. I know on when you were driving on it directly, that's one of the worst things you can do. You notice you said that end is mushroomed, yes. And it wasn't from being mushroomed when you hit it so much with a pin as it was when you hit it direct with a hammer. And something else needs to be on there. And for some reason, the transfer of force, because you're holding it solid, it transfers the force. It doesn't suddenly hit with a strike where the rest of the pin doesn't move and the outside end gives. Well, you've got the punch in there to give. The shorter the punch, the better. But if you're going to leave the track pads on, yeah. However, you took one track pad off. That's good, but what I would have done is taken 2 off. Nick the little links because it's your first time tearing it apart. And then put a plate across your 2 links. And then driven it out with a hammer. You say, yeah, but I got to put it back together. We are at that point. Now you go to put all this back together. You can use the same pin if you want to. Turn it. Because you saw it was worn on one side, which is normal. So you turn your pin, and that one's a little bit better shape. You go to put it back together. The pin slides in with a hammer. It's like, that doesn't seem like much of a press fit. It's not. 2 things are done here depending on who you talk to. One guy, Ralph, that had taught me the nick principle there, what he would do is just you weld the groove shut. You know, grind it out so you get good penetration, and then weld the groove shut on both sides. Yeah, the weld, it shrinks it right down on a pin. It's going to hold it. But the other one is you can weld around the end of the pin. I wouldn't recommend welding all the way around because that tends to grab and shrink itself away. I'd probably weld on opposite sides, front and back, on both. That way, when the pin decides to try and move, if the weld does break loose, You have enough to stay over the end of it, but you still have your press fit. Well, your press fit from welding can hold it in place anyway, and you're just putting some nice little 1/2-inch beads on there to be sure it stays in place. And it also helps shrink it. So you weld that notch shut, weld around the end of it, well, on your side, on this end. That'll help hold the bugger in place. Especially on a smaller dozer like that and what you're doing with it, it should be fine. I've done it before on old excavators that guys don't want to monkey with. They wanted it welded all the way around. They said, well, when it breaks loose, it'll have a full circle to hold it. And I said, yeah, but because I weld full circle, it's more likely to break loose with the circle. And they said, that's okay. If the whole circle breaks loose, you're even part of it. So they were happy with it. They had done it and seen it before. They just called us because they didn't want to do it again. Okay, last but not least, while we're there, going through my pile. Okay, that's a complete link, relatively normal link. The bushing, the pin, and remember the press fits are different. Not for every company, but most companies, they are only a 3 to 5 thousandths press fit in the master, in either 5 to 10 or 7 to 10 on your normal pins. They press together hard, a lot harder. Okay, last but not least, on smaller machines, they'll have this thing called the Gator Link. I tried downloading the other style called a Z-Link. These teeth between the two, one latches over the other, and your track pad bolts go right into it. They're pretty cool, but quite often they'll break, mainly because they're interlocked, but they don't necessarily front to back, but side to side they tend to slide, and they give the bolt a little bit of work. I had a D275 450 horsepower dozer break one of those bolts off, and they called me in, and we couldn't get the other 3 loose, so we could tear it apart, clean it up, and put it back together properly. He said, don't get involved. We got to have the dozer. Well, okay. So for the next 5 hours, I think it was 5 or 6 hours, I got in there and was able to drill down into it. And then we put the heater hose in the hole, drilled into what was left of the bolt down below as far as we could. I think I got all the way through, cleaned it out, and kept that in there and put an easy out on the end of a long bolt that would still go down inside the hose. And then we heated and cooled that link, I think 8 or 10 times until that thing broke loose. And we're talking something that's a lot bigger than my thumb. When you could get your thumb in the hole, it was a nice big, I think 20 or 22 millimeter, which is larger than 3/4, which is 19. It was a big boy. I got that puppy out of there and got him back, the bolt back in there, and got it back out. And as far as I know, it continued. So later on that side, they did have to take apart the master. They did get it apart years later, and we put a track adjuster resealed in there. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with this, but if you remember the press fit, you remember what you're working with, and finding the master is half the key. And the funny part is that quite often, any other brand other than a Cat or a Komatsu, that master pin probably would have come out of there. But for some reason, with all those years, they tend to take a set. So, and what? Just to give you an idea, when we go out to work, especially on that size of a dozer, we will have a 50-ton press is what I used to use. Owatonna, the thing was 50 years old. There was no parts for it available. They all had to be made. So if we need any track push pins or anything else, and the problem I had at Anderson was, if you needed the pin, they would go back through their history and reorder every pin that had ever been made. They didn't want us to get on there and tell them what we needed. So we ended up with 2, 3, and 4 pins we never needed. So the 50-year-old press, we were scrambling, man. But then most of the time we were scrambling is because people would use the thing in stupid manners. You were talking about leaving a pin in there going all the way across while you were trying to get the pin out the other side, yada, yada, yada. Well, while you were trying to pull it up, it was pressed. If you'd taken the pin out, it would have come up. That's one thing. And the fact that they spread so you could do that, that's a good thing. Your pin is probably shot. You might be able to grind it or do something with it, but just go get a new pin. It's a Cat. You'll be able to get one. And then it's aftermarket. You could probably get one from, what were they? ITR, Burco, and there's a third company that's quite popular lately. Look them up online, you'll find them. It'll be worth the trouble. Don't put a grade 8 bolt in there. It's not designed with abrasion resistance like those pins are, because they run in dirt. You know, it's a different world. But if all you're going to do is make a pond or something once in a while, replace the bolt every so often, it's up to you. I wouldn't, but I know a lot of people that would. With the amount of welding you did on that track frame, which is all, people might complain and say something weird about it, but that's normal. If you got enough room, grind it down and put a wear plate in, and I've had some so bad I cut them out and just put some more steel in there, fresh steel, and then weld it on top of that to give it a wear surface. I've been down that road before, but that is what you do on those old dogs, especially when you own them. You're saving money. So I hope that helps you out to a little bit. The other one is, quite often I will take the pin out in the back because it's easier to get at. And you don't have your hydraulic cylinder sitting here in the front. So you take it out in the back if you can do it easily. If you have to fight with it and banging like you're doing, then yeah, you're better off doing it up front on the idler, because you're not beating your drive line apart in the back. So if you torched it and drove the pin out, I do it in the back on the sprocket, and while you're running the pin through there to get the thing out, leave the pin in there and roll it forward to the front where it's easier to work on. Just a thought, because I have done that multitudinous times, because it's easier to work on in the back. But usually, like I say, we're working with a press, and that's on dozers. On excavators, you got all kinds of room. Back, front, doesn't matter. Just turn the house and you got plenty of room. So those are some ideas to help you out for the next one. Why? Well, because I saw how you were struggling and you have all the right ideas, but that one point, and if you're not experienced at it, you'll miss a lot of points. To give you another safety thing too, because you seem like the guy that may have some contacts. If you do get a track press and you're able to use a track press at any point in time, if you're young enough, you might be. But the one thing I will warn is never, ever, 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 never, under any circumstances, this is one of the few times I get dogmatic and pushy, never. You take your 2 track pads off, you got the thing on there, and you're going to start pressing a pin. Never, ever use a blank pin, which is as you're pushing, you put the track together with a blank pin, and you're starting a pin, and you push one out because it's loose fit. That's your blanking pin. It's just enough to get through there. Never use that to press anything ever. That's number 1. Number 2, before you even start to press that pin, never ever even use the standard push pin. People will argue with you left and right to put the proper pin in there to start that. Never, ever use an actual push pin. They're too long and they flex too much, and they can kill you when they come out of there at hundreds of miles an hour. Plus the weight of a 2-pound piece of iron flying at you. Even though they're solid, tool steel, and they have a dinger on them to sit back in a hole to hold it in place while you press. Never. Stack as much of the largest iron you can all the way up to the pin, then put just a little piece in there, just slightly smaller than the pin. And once you break that pin loose and just get it moving, now you put your long pin in there. Trust me on this. I've seen people tell me I'm crazy, and I've watched push pins, snap the back end off and fly 50 yards, 150 feet. Just saying. And if some idiot puts a blanking pin in there, that crushes sooner because it's soft steel. Well, now you've got a real problem because you got this little piece of snake metal in there locking everything up. So if you can get your hands on a track press or something similar, great. But just make sure that first push to break it loose is never a full long pin. It's the largest diameter you can get on there up to the just small enough to push that pin and get it started. In some cases, I've actually had a pin be proud, 1/8 of an inch or more, and then just stack it right up to it and get it to move. But don't hit that side link. Just stop on the side link, yes. All right, hopefully that'll help you. The main reason I'm going through this is you got that old John Deere 1010 dozer. Something tells me you're going to be doing a lot more tracks if you put that thing together. And that's going to be a fun ride for you. Anyway, Peace out. Have fun. Catch you later.